Welcome. This audiobook is a contemporary guide to the sublime vision of the great Buddhist teacher Nagarjuna. We will journey together through his core teachings, exploring what it means to live a free and awake life. Let's begin with an exploration of what we might call intuitions of the sublime. Section 1. Behind the gilded Swayambhu Stupa in Nepal, a monument whose painted eyes gaze over the capital city of Kathmandu, there is a plain building. Inside, you'll find a single shabby room, empty except for a bronze door smeared with vermilion powder. Tibetans believe this door leads to a cave, and from that cave, a passageway descends to a subterranean lake. It was here, the stories say, that the Indian sage Nagarjuna was taken by a species of subaquatic serpents called nagas. Their purpose was to help him retrieve the Buddha's forgotten wisdom discourses. By meditating on these hidden teachings, Nagarjuna discovered how to tolerate the terrifying and fascinating emptiness that quivers just beneath the threshold of common sense. After his discovery, Nagarjuna returned to solid ground to reveal what he had learned. Today, the door of that cave is locked and bolted. Once a year, it is opened by a Newari Buddhist priest who enters to perform religious rites. Rumors still circulate about yogis suspended in meditation inside, and of curious pilgrims who have entered but never returned. In another part of Kathmandu, in a rambling, dilapidated temple school called the Tamil Bahal, some ancient scriptures are preserved. They are stored under lock and key in metal trunks, wrapped in endless layers of colored cloth and brocade. Inside are 4 volumes of the Buddha's wisdom discourses. Each volume consists of about 300 loose-leaf pages made of a pliant black material. The Sanskrit text of the discourse is meticulously inscribed in gold ink. According to the priest and elders of this temple, these volumes were retrieved by a Nepalese merchant named Singhasattva from Lake Manasarovar at the foot of Mount Kailash in western Tibet. The story goes that during a trading mission, the boat carrying Singhasattva and his companions went down in a storm on the lake. They were rescued by maidens who took them to their palace. But then, Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, appeared to Singhasattva. He warned him that the maidens were actually ogresses who wanted to devour them. To escape, the merchants had to flee without looking back. Only Singhasattva was able to resist taking one final glance at his cannibalistic lover. The others were killed and eaten. On his return journey across the lake, Singhasattva was given the 4 volumes of scripture by the serpent king of the lake. He learned that they were transcribed by Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom, who had entrusted them to the Nagas for safekeeping. When Singhasattva returned in triumph to Kathmandu, he was hailed as a saint. Since then, the Tamil Bahal has been dedicated to his worship, and a statue of him adorns the main shrine. Interestingly, the priest and elders are unaware of any connection with Nagarjuna. Yet, in an unkempt courtyard at the back of the temple, stands a white stupa. It is said to have been miraculously transported from the top of the hill behind Swayambhu to save pilgrims the trek to the shrine at the peak. That hill is called Nagarjuna. It is now a nature reserve. Farther east in the Kathmandu Valley, nestled among terraced fields of millet, is a temple called Sankshu, a shrine to the tantric goddess Vajrayogini. All alone in a meadow, some distance behind the elegant cluster of buildings, is a chipped stone statue of a seated Buddha with a halo of 7 snakes. This statue is identified as Nagarjuna. The villagers treat it with a casual reverence, as if the gods are still familiar figures in their lives, but they cannot explain why it is there. The legends that have grown around Nagarjuna for nearly 2,000 years are reminiscent of Proteus from Greek mythology. Proteus was an old man of the sea with the gift of prophecy, but he was an ambiguous prophet. When people consulted him, he would assume a different shape and elude their grasp. Toward the end of his verses from the center, Nagarjuna reflects on the relationship between gods and men. He writes, "If the gods were us, we would be eternal, for the gods are unborn in eternity. Were we other than them, we would be ephemeral. Were we different, we would never connect." Although Buddhism traditionally sees the gods as mortal celestial beings in a separate realm, Nagarjuna treats them as the dimension of eternity within our own fleeting human condition. He suggests that the enduring and the fleeting elements of our being are completely dependent on each other. Neither makes sense without the other. What, asks Nagarjuna, can be ephemeral without eternity? Nagarjuna himself is a protean, chameleon-like figure, endlessly transforming in response to changing circumstances. He was born a Brahmin, yet he became the foremost poet of emptiness. Throughout history, he has appeared as a monk, a founder of Mahayana Buddhism, a philosopher, a tantric adept, an alchemist, a Nepalese trader, a minor hill in the Himalayas, and even a god of the millet crop. Nagarjuna cannot be confined to any one of these roles, nor can he be imagined as anyone else. His voice echoes through history, speaking in different languages in different places and times, which for someone are always here and now. Section 2. If Nagarjuna is the poet of emptiness, then Gautama, the Buddha, was its prophet. For the first 500 years after his death, the Buddha was remembered as an emptiness. In the stone friezes that survive from that time, he is represented not by a human figure, but by an empty seat, a tree with no one beneath it, a pair of footprints, or the wheel of Dharma that he set in motion. While he was alive, he referred to himself as the Tathagata, which means the one thus gone. It was only when Greek settlers in India converted to Buddhism, shortly before Nagarjuna's time, that Gautama was first personified, in the form of the god Apollo. As a young man, the Buddha was driven to find a response to the great existential questions of birth, sickness, aging, and death. This quest led to an awakening in which he saw how human anguish is rooted in confusion and craving. For the remaining 40 years of his life, he taught a path that avoids the extremes of sensory indulgence and harsh asceticism, engaging every dimension of human life. The central goal of this path is to realize freedom from the confusion and craving that generate anguish. To point the way to this sublime freedom, the Buddha spoke of emptiness. In an early Buddhist text, someone asks, "What is liberation of mind through emptiness?" The discourse describes the answer like this: a monk having gone to the forest, or to the root of a tree, or to an empty hut reflects, "This is empty of a self or what belongs to a self." This is liberation of mind through emptiness. Just as a natural landscape or an abandoned building is free of human ownership, our experience is intrinsically neither me nor mine. For the Buddha, recognizing our mental and physical processes as empty of a self was the way to dispel the confusion that causes our suffering. This confusion creates a sense of self as a fixed, solid thing, disconnected from the dynamic, fluid processes of life. Emptiness doesn't deny these vital processes. Instead, it challenges the insistent fixation on a separate self that obscures them, which in turn makes life feel flat, frustrating, and repetitive. Emptiness, then, is a symbol of freedom. The Buddha described emptiness as the abode of a great person. It isn't just something to understand. It's a condition in which one aspires to live. Gautama encouraged his monks not only to find liberation through emptiness in a quiet forest, but also to dwell in emptiness while wandering through villages for alms. Living in emptiness is the same as following the path to awakening itself. It involves not only letting go of craving and confusion, but also cultivating awareness and insight into the nature of yourself and your world. Emptiness is a metaphor for an authentic way of being. The great person who lives in emptiness is one who can remain centered in the middle way. The Buddha first introduced this middle way as a path that avoids the extremes of indulgence and self-mortification. Later, it was refined to include the ability to resist the lure of any form of dualism. For example, a wanderer named Vacchagotta once asked the Buddha, "How is it, Venerable Gautama? Does the self exist?" The Buddha remained silent. The wanderer then asked, "Then how is it, Venerable Gautama? Does the self not exist?" Again, the Buddha remained silent. Confused, Vacchagotta got up and left. The Buddha then turned to his attendant Ananda and explained, "If I had answered, 'The self exists,' that would have encouraged the belief in an eternal, unchanging self. And if I had answered, 'The self does not exist,' that would have encouraged the belief in nihilism, that nothing matters." Although the Buddha taught a doctrine of selflessness, in this situation he recognized a dilemma. To stay true to his middle way, he had to avoid saying anything that might suggest a person has a permanent, essential identity. But he also couldn't suggest the opposite, that a person is a pure illusion, incapable of making moral choices with real consequences. By steering a middle course between eternalism and nihilism, the Buddha remained suspended between yes and no, between self and no self, in a silent emptiness. To dwell in emptiness means living with the ambiguous and non-dualistic nature of life. This is clear from the Buddha's response to the questions of another follower, Katyayana. He said, "Katyayana, everyday experience relies on the duality of it is and it is not. But for one who perceives how the things of the world arise and pass away, for him, there is no it is and no it is not." He continued, "Everything exists is simply one extreme, Katyayana, and nothing exists is the other extreme. The Tathagata relies on neither of these two extremes. He teaches the Dharma as a middle way. While the middle way is grounded in insight into the emptiness of the self, it expands this experience into a sensibility that resists any attempt to pin things down as simply this or that." Section 3. At the same time as the Buddha, but unknown to him, the concept of emptiness was also being taught in China by the Taoist sage Lao Tzu. For Lao Tzu, human suffering could be resolved by living in harmony with the underlying principle of the Tao, or the Way. He saw the strife and misery of the world as symptoms of a society where people had lost touch with the naturalness and spontaneity of the Way. The fourth chapter of Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching describes the Way as an empty vessel that may be drawn from without ever needing to be filled. It is bottomless, the very progenitor of all things in the world. The Way is also compared to a bellows in that it is empty, but gives a supply that never fails. To live in harmony with the source of life, a sage must emulate the qualities of the Way itself. Like the Tao, he too must be empty of artifice, self-importance, and any attempt to control the natural unfolding of things. The practice of the Tao, according to Lao Tzu, doesn't involve achieving or accumulating anything. Instead, it is about subtracting day by day, until you reach a state of inactivity through which everything can be activated. About 150 years later, another Taoist, Chuang-Tzu, told the story of Yen Hui, who asks his teacher, "What is the fasting of the mind?" He is told, "Make your will one. Don't listen with your ears, listen with your mind. No, don't listen with your mind, but listen with your spirit. Listening stops with the ears, the mind stops with recognition, but spirit is empty and waits on all things. The Way gathers in emptiness alone. Emptiness is the fasting of the mind." Yen Hui then said, "Before I heard this, I was certain that I was Hui, but now that I have heard it, there is no more Hui. Can this be called emptiness?" His teacher replied, "That's all there is to it." Chuang-Tzu, like the Buddha, believed that emptiness involves an absence of a solid self, and that this is realized through contemplative discipline. But Chuang-Tzu presents emptiness as a playful, anarchic freedom, unconstrained by religiosity. In his text, another sage says, "I came at him empty, wriggling and turning, not knowing anything about who or what, now dipping and bending, now flowing in waves." Chuang-Tzu then tells the story of Lietzu, who meets this sage and realizes that he had never really begun to learn anything. So Lietzu went back home, where he replaced his wife at the stove, fed the pigs as though he were feeding people, and showed no preferences in the things he did. Chuang-Tzu concludes with this advice: "Do not be an embodier of fame. Do not be a storehouse of schemes. Do not be an undertaker of projects. Do not be a proprietor of wisdom. Embody to the fullest what has no end, and wander where there is no trail. Hold on to all that you have received from heaven, but do not think you have gotten anything. Be empty, that is all." When Buddhism entered China in the 2nd century, the Chinese were struck by the similarities between its teachings and those of the Taoist sages. At first, it was even regarded as another form of Taoism. Many early translators of Buddhist texts had Taoist backgrounds and used Taoist terms to explain unfamiliar Indian ideas. The Taoists had a belief that after Lao Tzu wrote the Tao Te Ching, he traveled to the West to convert the barbarians. They believed his travels brought him to India, where he became the teacher of the young man who would become the Buddha. Some even believed Lao Tzu was the Buddha. This idea remained a source of controversy between Buddhists and Taoists in China for centuries, until the Mongolian Buddhist Emperor Kublai Khan banned it by decree in the year 1281. Section 4. At the same time that Buddhism was weaving its way along the Silk Route into China, its teachings were being rearticulated in India by the enigmatic figure of Nagarjuna. About 2 centuries later, the first known account of Nagarjuna's life was written down by Kumarajiva, a Central Asian scholar who translated verses from the center from Sanskrit into Chinese. According to Kumarajiva, Nagarjuna was born at the foot of an Arjuna tree to a Brahmin family in South India. He excelled in the traditional religious and secular subjects of the priestly caste and was renowned for his learning by the age of 20. But he felt his sensual side was unfulfilled. He and 3 friends learned the art of invisibility from a sorcerer. They used this power to enter the private quarters of the royal palace and seduce the women. When the king found out, he ordered his soldiers to occupy the palace. The soldiers killed Nagarjuna's 3 friends by aiming their swords just above the footprints left by the invisible men. Nagarjuna only escaped by standing very close to the king. This brush with death taught the young man how craving leads to anguish. He fled the palace for the mountains, where he became a monk and studied the teachings of the Buddha. Within 3 months, he had mastered the early canonical texts, but he felt they didn't answer his deepest questions. He then met an old monk who introduced him to the doctrines of Mahayana Buddhism. At the time of Nagarjuna, the Mahayana, or Great Vehicle, was a newly emerging movement. Its advocates criticized the spiritual detachment and social isolation of monks who claimed to represent the early Buddhist tradition. They argued that these monks placed too much emphasis on their own liberation and ignored the suffering of the world. The Mahayanists took as their ideal the Bodhisattva, one who seeks awakening not just for their own sake, but in order to be able to liberate all others from suffering. Followers of this movement believed these ideas were not new, but had been taught by the historical Buddha himself. However, they believed the discourses containing these Mahayana doctrines had been preserved only in non-human realms. Now, the time was ripe for them to be shared with the world. Nagarjuna was so inspired by this vision that he left his mountain retreat and wandered through India in search of other Mahayana discourses. In his travels, he honed his debating skills against both Buddhists and non-Buddhists. He defeated all who challenged him and became so convinced of his own superior understanding that he declared, "I have no master." He founded an order based on his own understanding and created a rule for his disciples to follow. It was at this point, the story goes, that a Naga, a serpent being, had compassion for him and guided him to the bed of a lake where the Mahayana wisdom discourses, entrusted to the Nagas by the Buddha, were stored. These wisdom discourses are a series of inspirational dialogues between the Buddha and his leading disciples, exploring the metaphysical implications of emptiness at great length. Through studying these texts, Nagarjuna became convinced of the central importance of emptiness in the process of awakening. He realized that the path taught by the Buddha was grounded in a deep, intuitive understanding of the sublime contingency of both self and things. Upon returning to India from the Naga realms, he composed verses from the center and other commentaries, which helped to accelerate the spread of Mahayana Buddhism. There's another story in which Nagarjuna's fame grew so great that he was invited by a king to a contest of magical powers with a Brahmin scholar. The Brahmin created a lake and seated himself on a giant lotus flower in the middle of it, mocking Nagarjuna for being stranded on solid ground like an ox. In response, Nagarjuna conjured up a white elephant that crushed the lotus and tossed the Brahmin back onto dry land. The Brahmin admitted defeat but made a wish that Nagarjuna were dead. Nagarjuna then locked himself inside a room. The next day, a worried disciple broke down the door. A cicada flew out. The room was empty. Kumarajiva's biography seems to weave 2 different versions of Nagarjuna's life into one. The first version portrays Nagarjuna as a passionate trickster with an exceptional critical intelligence, unwilling to settle for the dogmas of either Brahmanism or Buddhism. This version, which suggests Nagarjuna intended to found his own order, feels authentic because it's hard to see what later sectarian interests would have been served by adding this detail. While Nagarjuna's Verses from the Center tells us nothing about his early life, the dedication and other passages show his deep faith in the historical Buddha, Gautama. The text also confirms his familiarity with the early Buddhist tradition. The only discourse of the Buddha he mentions by name is the Questions of Katyayana, a text from the early Pali canon. He also refers to at least one early Mahayana discourse. Throughout the verses, you are impressed by a highly developed analytical mind, consistent with the claim that he was a brilliant debater. The second version of his life, however, is less historically plausible. Its mythical elements show how Nagarjuna came to be seen as a founder of Mahayana Buddhism. Yet, nowhere in Verses from the Center is there a reference to the Buddha's wisdom discourses or the Mahayana ideal of the Bodhisattva. In fact, Nagarjuna explicitly understands the Buddhist path to be the way of the liberated sage, or arhat. Since the Buddha himself compared this sage to a Naga, it's possible that Nagarjuna received teachings on emptiness that had been preserved as an oral tradition in the early schools. Whatever the case, Nagarjuna is convinced that the intelligence that animates the Buddhist path is incompatible with any orthodoxy. He concludes his inquiry into the self with these lines. When Buddhas don't appear and their followers are gone, the wisdom of awakening bursts forth by itself. If Nagarjuna thought the vitality of the early tradition was exhausted and that the Mahayana was the way forward, why didn't he use this verse to praise the virtues of the Bodhisattva? Instead, he looks to the emergence of solitary Buddhas, those who achieve awakening on their own, through their own insight into contingency and emptiness, independent of any Buddhist institutions. Whoever he was, Nagarjuna was indisputably the first person after the Buddha to express the Dharma in his own unique voice. Until then, Buddhists had mostly confined themselves to remembering the Buddha's discourses, classifying and defining his key ideas into complex metaphysical systems. By Nagarjuna's time, there was no consensus among the different Buddhist schools about what constituted an authoritative canon, or what all the conflicting discourses even meant. In this uncertain environment, Nagarjuna's Verses from the Center acted as a catalyst, triggering a revolution in Buddhist tradition. Through his startling sequence of verses, he recovered the core liberating insights of the Buddha's teaching and expressed them in an original and compelling language. He opened up the possibility for tradition to be animated by contemporary voices, not just by reference to ancient texts. The key to Nagarjuna's work lies in his understanding of emptiness as inseparable from the utter contingency of life itself. Moreover, he declares that the emptiness you experience when you ease your obsessive hold on a fixed self or on things is in fact the Buddha's middle way. He writes, "Contingency is emptiness, which, contingently configured, is the middle way." Emptiness is not a state, but a way. It's not only inseparable from the world of contingencies, it too is contingently configured. To experience emptiness is not a descent into a void of nothingness, nor an ascent to a separate realm. It is a recovery of the freedom to configure yourself as an intentional, unimpeded path through the shifting, ambiguous sands of life. Recognizing this emptiness is not a negation of life. It gives us a glimpse of what allows anything to happen at all. As he puts it, when emptiness is possible, everything is possible. Were emptiness impossible, nothing would be possible. Emptiness is a way of talking about the sublime depth, mystery, and contingency that are revealed as you probe beneath the surface of anything that seems to exist in isolation. Emptiness is the untraceability of any such isolated thing. Yet, for something to be empty does not mean there is nothing there at all. Were there a trace of something, says Nagarjuna, there would be a trace of emptiness. Were there no trace of anything, there would be no trace of emptiness. To understand emptiness doesn't mean that emptiness becomes a separate object of your consciousness. Emptiness is experienced as the letting go of fixed ideas about yourself and the world. Nagarjuna says, Buddhas say emptiness is relinquishing opinions. Believers in emptiness are incurable. You can become fixated on emptiness just as easily as on anything else. When that happens, the very thing that is meant to stop fixations becomes an insidious trap. To symbolize this, Nagarjuna compares emptiness to a poisonous snake, a dangerous but fascinating creature that can navigate the trickiest terrain. A skilled handler knows exactly how to pick it up, but someone who doesn't will be bitten and killed. Running through the verses is an urgency that reveals Nagarjuna's determination to ease the existential and linguistic fixations that keep us locked in repetitive cycles of suffering. He pulls the comfortable rug of common sense out from under your feet, short-circuiting the habits of the mind and leaving you with nothing to hold on to. Instead of offering the consolations of belief, he holds out the tantalizing possibility of freedom. Nagarjuna is not interested in simply repeating the Buddha's discourses or offering formulaic reinterpretations of orthodox doctrines. He acknowledges his debt to tradition while speaking in a voice that departs from its conventions. A playful and provocative tone runs through his text. The verses embody the movement of a supple but disquieting intelligence, which constantly has to sidestep the logical traps of the very language it must use. His awareness of the contingency of self and other, something and nothing, is expressed in a voice that is inquisitive, dramatic, and always poised to surprise. For example, believers believe in Buddhas who vanish in nirvana. Don't imagine empty Buddhas vanishing or not. Nagarjuna has relatively little to say about emptiness. Instead, each poem is an attempt to disclose emptiness through the play of language. Poetry works not by describing its subject from the outside, but by imaginatively entering it to disclose it from within. As a poet, Nagarjuna gives voice to the freedom of emptiness from the inside. He isn't interested in confirming what is safe and familiar, but in exploring what is unsettling and strange. Letting go of fixed opinions about yourself and the world can be both frightening and compelling. Although such emptiness may seem like an intolerable affront to your sense of identity and security, it can also be felt as an irresistible lure into a life that is awesome and mysterious. Section 5. In the year 409, Kumarajiva, the scholar we met earlier, completed his Chinese translation of verses from the center. He also produced 2 other works attributed to Nagarjuna. These 3 texts formed the basis of the Three Treatise School, which launched a Mahayana Buddhist wisdom tradition in China. Many of the Chinese who were drawn to this school, including Kumarajiva's chief disciple Seng Chao, were Taoists who saw Nagarjuna's work as an extension of the writings of Lao Tzu and Chuang Tzu. Over time, however, the Three Treatise School distanced itself from Taoism and became absorbed in the complexities of Buddhist metaphysics. This isolation from the native culture of China led to its decline and eventual disappearance in the 9th century. In contrast, Chan, which later became known as Zen Buddhism, survived in China partly because it maintained a Taoist sensibility. It did this through its anecdotal style, its celebration of spontaneity and naturalness, and its commitment to native traditions of the arts. By seeing itself as a transmission outside of scriptures, involving a direct pointing to the human heart, Chan emphasized emptiness as a living experience. Nagarjuna is recognized as the 13th patriarch of this school. When the 28th patriarch, the Indian monk Bodhidharma, arrived in China in the early 6th century, he is said to have visited the court of Emperor Wu of Liang. This ruler is portrayed as a devout Buddhist, focused on gaining merit through good works. Bodhidharma tried to turn the emperor's attention away from spiritual success toward an understanding of emptiness. Emperor Wu asked the great master Bodhidharma, "What is the highest meaning of the holy truths?" Bodhidharma said, "Unholy emptiness." The emperor then asked, "Who is facing me?" Bodhidharma replied, "I don't know." The Buddha's holy truths, understanding anguish, letting go of craving, realizing cessation, and cultivating a path, are not things to believe in so much as actions to undertake. As soon as they are elevated to the status of icons, they can become obstacles. Bodhidharma subverts the emperor's religious piety, leaving him with nowhere to stand and nothing to grasp. His provocative reply is a challenge to let go of consoling beliefs and dwell in the unknowing perplexity of emptiness. Bodhidharma then went to Mount Sung, where he spent 9 years staring at the wall of a cave. During this time, he attracted students who were as intent on attaining enlightenment as Emperor Wu was on gaining merit. One winter, a monk named Huiko approached the cave, stood outside in the snow, cut off his arm as an act of devotion, and cried out, "Your disciple's mind is not yet at peace. I beg you, Master, give it rest." Bodhidharma said, "Bring your mind to me, and I will put it to rest." Huiko replied, "I have searched for the mind, but have never been able to find it." "There," said Bodhidharma, "I have put it to rest for you." Huiko's inquiry into the nature of his mind led him neither to a metaphysical essence nor to a blank nothingness. He simply couldn't find anything he could point to and say, "That is the essence of the mind." The story illustrates a therapeutic strategy of questioning that aims to free you from fixations on both things and nothings. Instead of encouraging his disciple to realize emptiness, which could easily be misunderstood as something sacred or as nothing at all, Bodhidharma asked him to investigate his own immediate experience. This led to an easing of Huiko's vision, where the constrictive hold of fixation was, for a moment at least, relaxed. Bodhidharma is remembered for introducing Chan Buddhism into China, and Huiko is regarded as his successor. 4 generations later, with the teachings of its 6th Chinese patriarch, Huineng, Chan emerged from relative obscurity to become one of the most influential Buddhist movements in East Asia. As a young man, Huineng is said to have experienced awakening upon hearing a passage from a wisdom discourse that contained the phrase, "where the mind has nowhere to rest." He later described this non-resting state as the original nature of man. For Huineng, the practice of meditation involves seeing this nature without confusion. Emptiness is a way of living in the rich and complex world, not becoming absorbed in some mystical state. Huineng said, "Do not sit with a mind fixed on emptiness. If you do, you will fall into a neutral kind of emptiness. Emptiness includes the sun, moon, stars and planets, the great earth, mountains and rivers, all trees and grasses, bad men and good men, bad things and good things, heaven and hell. They are all in the midst of emptiness." A more explicit warning against mystical abstraction is found in this exchange between Shikong and Shitang, 2 disciples of a later master. Shikong asked, "Can you grasp emptiness?" Shitang replied, "Yes." "How do you do it?" Shikong asked. Shitang then closed his hand around the empty space between them. Shikong said, "You don't know how to grasp emptiness." "How do you do it then?" asked Shitang. Shikong grabbed Shitang's nose and pulled it. Shitang cried out, "Ow! You're going to pull off my nose!" Shikong replied, "That is the only way to grasp emptiness." This dialogue is quoted by Dogen, the 13th century Japanese Zen master, whose writings constantly return to the creativity, sensuality, and immediacy of emptiness. For Dogen, all things play in emptiness. Every moment of sitting meditation is like a hammer striking emptiness, whose exquisite peal permeates everywhere. And nowhere is emptiness more apparent than in nature itself. He wrote, "You must surely know emptiness is a perfect grass. This emptiness is bound to bloom, like hundreds of grasses blossoming. Seeing a dazzling variety of the flowers of emptiness, we surmise an infinity of the fruits of emptiness. We observe the bloom and fall of the flowers of emptiness and learn the spring and autumn of them." For Dogen, the awareness of nature as a field of emptiness is the culmination of a sustained reflection that begins with an analysis of oneself. Although your sense of I might instinctively feel separate from the natural world, meditative inquiry erodes this fixed assumption. Just as Huiko could not find an irreducible essence of mind, there is nothing within your body, feelings, thoughts, or consciousness to which you can point and say, "That is the real me." At the same time, a sense of self is impossible without these physical sensations, emotions, perceptions, and thoughts. Experiencing this paradoxical nature of the self results in a loss of alienation. This is not self-negation, but a reawakening to a sense of the world in which you are not a stranger, but a participant. As Dogen says, to study the way is to study oneself. To study oneself is to forget oneself. To forget oneself is to be awakened by all things. To be awakened by all things is to let body and mind of self and others fall away. Even the traces of awakening come to an end, and this traceless awakening is continued endlessly. Whether or not Dogen knew Nagarjuna's verses from the center, these words are one of the most succinct summaries of Nagarjuna's vision. And regardless of whether Nagarjuna saw himself as a patriarch of the Zen tradition, listening to him as a Zen master helps you hear the provocative and enigmatic nuances in his voice. Now we enter the main body of Nagarjuna's verses. These short, poetic chapters are designed to challenge our assumptions and open us to a new way of seeing. If you're enjoying this exploration of emptiness and a more authentic way of being, consider supporting my future projects by trying a free Audible trial for 30 days. Your support helps me continue to bring these profound teachings to life in an accessible audio format. You can find a link in the description of this audiobook. Thank you. Now let's continue with the verses. Walking. I do not walk between the step already taken and the one I'm yet to take, which both are motionless. Is walking not the motion between one step and the next? What moves between them? Could I not move as I walk? If I move when I walk, there would be two motions, one moving me and one my feet. Two of us stroll by. There is no walking without walkers and no walkers without walking. Can I say that walkers walk? Couldn't I say they don't? Walking does not start in steps taken or to come or in the act itself. Where does it begin? Before I raise a foot, is there motion, a step taken or to come whence walking could begin? What has gone, what moves, what is to come? Can I speak of walkers when neither walking, steps taken, nor to come ever end? Were walking and walker one, I would be unable to tell them apart. Were they different, there would be walkers who do not walk. These moving feet reveal a walker but did not start him on his way. There was no walker prior to departure. Who was going where? Seeing. If my eyes cannot see themselves, how can they see something else? Were there no trace of something seen, how could I see it all? Neither seeing nor unseeing see. Seeing reveals a seer who is neither detached nor undetached from seeing. How could you see, and what would you see in the absence of a seer? Just as a child is born from father and mother, so consciousness springs from eyes and colorful shapes. Without these eyes, how could I know consciousness, impact, feeling, and thirst, clinging, evolving, birth, aging, and death? Seers seeing sights explain hearers hearing sounds, smellers smelling smells, tasters tasting tastes, touchers touching textures, thinkers thinking thoughts. Body. I have no body apart from parts which form it. I know no parts apart from a body. A body with no parts would be unformed. A part of my body apart from my body would be absurd. Were the body here or not, it would need no parts. Partless bodies are pointless. Do not get stuck in the body. I cannot say my body is like its parts. I cannot say it's something else. Feelings, perceptions, drives, minds. Things are like this body in every way. Conflict with emptiness is no conflict. Objections to emptiness, no objections. Space. No trace of space is there before the absence of obstruction which describes it. With no obstruction, how can there be absence of obstruction? Who distinguishes between them? Space is not obstruction or an absence of it, nor is it a description or something to describe. Fluidity and heat, energy and gravity are just like space. In seeing things to be or not to be, fools fail to see a world at ease. Chapter Addiction. If an unaddicted addict preceded his addiction, addiction would depend on someone unaddicted. Addicts and addictions go together. Were addicts and addictions one, they could not go together. Were addicts and addictions two, how would you ever know they were together? If they go together, how can they not be different? For only different things can be together things. Without differences, nothing goes together. Addicts and addictions are neither together nor untogether, just as all things are neither together nor untogether. Section 6. Let's pause our journey through Nagarjuna's verses to look at how his poetic legacy continued in India through the 8th century monk Shantideva. He is renowned as the author of A Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, a 900-verse poem that was so influential it was even attributed to Nagarjuna himself in China. For Shantideva, the Bodhisattva's vow to achieve awakening for the sake of all living beings is the inevitable result of a sudden eruption of unconditional love, or bodhicitta, into one's life. He compares this love to a lightning flash on a dark, cloudy night that momentarily illuminates everything, and he compares himself to a blind man who has found a jewel in a heap of garbage. Shantideva recognizes that a monk who follows the Buddha's advice to abide in emptiness is thereby exposed to the possibility of an unpredictable explosion of feeling. His insight into emptiness doesn't just change the way he views the world, it also transforms the way he feels about it. His heart is abruptly open to the anguish of others, which far exceeds his own, prompting a spontaneous longing to relieve their suffering. Yet, Shantideva remains ironically self-aware, acknowledging the irrational nature of this passion to save others. Was it not crazy, he wonders, to have made that vow when unaware of even my own limitations? To fulfill his vow, Shantideva chooses not to engage directly with the world but to retreat from it. He departs for the solitude of nature in search of wide-open places devoid of any sense of mine. He wanders freely, resting to meditate in caves, empty shrines, or at the feet of trees. The inspiration of the sublime selflessness of the natural world allows him to see the pettiness of his self-centered fantasies. Yet at the heart of this spacious stillness, he discovers that he is not alone. He is intimately interwoven into a seamless web of sentient life, which he compares to a vast organism. He writes, "Just as these arms and legs are seen as limbs of a body, why are embodied creatures not seen as limbs of life? Just as a hand reaches out to soothe the pain in the foot, why don't we spontaneously respond to the suffering of another in the same way?" Shantideva realizes that this is due to a deep, visceral clinging to the idea of being a separate self. As long as we are enthralled by this fixation, our spontaneous concern for others will tend to be felt only for those who fall within the range of what we consider mine. The pain of those outside this range can then be treated with indifference and even satisfaction. Shantideva refines Nagarjuna's vision by spelling out the emotional and ethical implications of emptiness. Emptiness not only eases the cognitive constriction of self-centeredness, it also generates feelings of empathy. When Shantideva dissolved his sense of being a closed cell of self, he did not vanish into an abyss of nothingness. Instead, he rediscovered himself as a cell that was part of the interdependent, multicellular organism of existence itself. He realized that his sense of being Shantideva was not grounded in some isolated personal essence hidden deep inside him, but was created out of his myriad and unrepeatable relationships with others. The emptiness that results from dissolving the seemingly impenetrable barrier between self and other enables Shantideva to see that I is only possible in relation to you. The very word I, which so poignantly hints at that elusive sense of what is most unique to a person, only makes sense as part of a language that includes you, him, her, us, and them. There never has been and never can be an I existing in isolation. Emptiness is counterintuitive because it contradicts the deepest sense a person has of being me. Yet, as Shantideva makes clear, emptiness does not eliminate this me, but transforms it. Contrary to expectation, an empty self turns out to be a relational self. When the impact of this insight strikes home, Shantideva recognizes that he can no longer live and behave as though the needs of I were intrinsically more important than those of you. He now understands the equality of self and others to be more than just a worthy moral assumption. It has become an inescapable existential fact. He reflects, I should dispel the pain of others because it hurts like my own, and I should be good to them because they feel just as I do. When both they and I are the same in wanting joy and not desiring pain, what is so special about me? Shantideva's experience of emptiness not only frees him from self-centeredness, but also confirms his initial revelation of love. Emptiness discloses a moral perspective that transcends any notion of me deliberately doing good for you. In dissolving such fixed conceptual distinctions, a continuum of feeling is revealed that can only conventionally be separated into my suffering versus yours. In this way, emptiness becomes the basis for an ethics of spontaneous, empathetic responsiveness. As he says, when I act for the sake of others, no amazement or conceit arises. Just like feeding myself, I hope for nothing in return. A legend grew up around Shantideva. It relates that while he was reciting his guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life to an audience of monks, he ascended into the sky and disappeared. This is said to have happened when he uttered the words, "When neither something nor nothing remains to be known, there is no alternative left but complete, non-referential ease." By associating this vision of emptiness with his miraculous departure, the legend suggests a symbolic release from the scholarly and moralistic constraints of the monastery into a life of unfettered ease and freedom. Having delivered his masterpiece, Shantideva shunned renown and sought anonymity. Later biographical fragments tell of him working as a palace guard, departing to the mountains as a hermit, and living with a consort in Bengal. For Shantideva, abiding in emptiness leads to the inexorable conclusion that to love the world means disappearing into its midst, to become no one. Shantideva was not alone in his rejection of institutional monasticism during this period. The story of a monk rising to prominence within a monastery only to reject it in favor of a return to the world is a common theme in the lives of the Buddhist tantric adepts, or Mahasiddhas, of India. Like their contemporaries, the Chan masters in China, the tantric adepts sought to embody the Buddha's teachings in the language and domain of everyday life and immediate experience. Both movements tried to recover the vitality of a tradition which, while promising freedom, has a curious tendency to become mired in its own rules and dogmas. 84 such adepts are celebrated, including Shantideva and Nagarjuna. Although this Nagarjuna is not the same historical person as the author of Verses from the Center, tradition has conflated the two figures. Like Shantideva, this later Nagarjuna is described as a gifted scholar who renounces monastic life. He becomes a wandering beggar and an alchemist who succeeds in producing an elixir of immortality. And like his second-century namesake, he gets involved in the affairs of a king, but rather than transforming into a cicada, he dies, decapitated by a blade of grass. Because he is suspected of being immortal, his head is taken a great distance from his body to prevent him from being resurrected. Legend, however, tells us that with every passing year, the head and body will slowly draw nearer to each other until they are reunited, and Nagarjuna will live once more. Now let us return to the verses of the original Nagarjuna. Chapter Birth. Were birth conditioned, it would be born and live, and die like all conditioned things. Were it unconditioned, how could it describe conditioned things? Does birth give birth to itself and something else, like light illuminates itself in something else? Light illuminates by shedding darkness. Can light dispel a dark it never meets? Were darkness shed by light it never meets, a single lamp could lift the darkness of a galaxy. If light illuminates itself in other things, does the dark obscure itself in other things? How can a child that's not yet born give birth to itself? What has been born, what's not yet born, and what is being born do not give birth. Everything contingent is naturally at ease. When everyone is dying, can I be born and live? Could I live but neither age nor die? The living are not the dying, nor the unliving the dying. Neither milk nor butter causes milk to cease. Something real would never die. Something can't be nothing. Nothing too would never die. You can't behead a person twice. Chapters. Real actors do not perform real acts, nor unreal actors unreal acts. Real actors are inactive. Real acts need no actors. Real actors do not perform unreal acts, nor unreal actors real acts. Unreal acts and unreal actors need no causes. No causes means no causality. No causality means no activity, actors or performance. No performance means no good and bad. No good and bad means no fruits of good and bad. No fruits of good and bad means no way to heaven, no way to freedom. Unreal real actors do not perform real unreal acts. Reality and unreality cancel each other out. Actors depend on acts and acts depend on actors. I cannot see it otherwise. When acts and actors vanish, you understand clinging and everything else. Already, am I already here before I see and taste and feel? If not, how could I see and taste and feel? How can I know if I'm already here or not? If I were here without them, they could be here without me. I reveal them and they reveal me. How can I be here without them? How can they be here without me? I am not already here before experience as such. Seeing reveals just the seer, tasting just the taster, feeling just the feeler. If I'm not already here before them all, could I be here before each one? Can the seer taste? Can the taster feel? Were they different, I would be legion. Nor am I tucked inside the elements, whence seeing and tasting and feeling unfold. If I to whom these things belong cannot be found, how can they be found? I do not precede them, nor am I with them, nor do I follow them. Let go of I am, let go of I am not. Fire. Were the fire its flames, act and actor would be one. Were flames something else, they could not have lit this fire. Independent and alone, eternal flames would burn forever, actors with no acts. Were the fire a fire only when it burns, how could you light this fire? Were your flames something else, they would never touch my fire, never light it and never die. They would burn and burn and burn. Though they are different, flames touch fires as a woman touches a man and a man a woman. Flame and fire merge. They unite despite being different. If flames depend on fires and fires upon flames, what comes first? Were the fire already there, the flame that lit it would flare again, or that fire would flicker flamelessly? If what flames depend on flames, what depends on what? How can flames to be depend on anything? What would do the depending? Flames do not depend on fires, nor are they independent of them. Fires do not depend on flames, nor are they independent of them. Flames and fires explain everything, the self and what it grasps, and also jugs and rolls of cloth, identity and difference, of self, of things. Before. Was there a before? If life has no beginning and no end, no before and no after, how can it be centered in a present? Were birth before and death after, I would be immortal with no history. Were death first and birth later, the dead would be unborn. I cannot be born and die at once. If birth were death, they would both be unoriginated. Why am I transfixed by them? Chapter Anguish. If anguish created itself, it would not be contingent, for the pain depends on what I'm doing now. Were it other than me and I other than it, the pain would be caused by someone else. Who am I if I create my own suffering? How can I be apart from pain I cause myself? Who am I if I can feel the suffering you create? Can I be apart from pain you cause me? Who are you who hurt me? How can you be apart from pain you cause me? Anguish is not caused by me. How can it be caused by you? Anguish caused by you is caused by your me too. Suffering is not caused by me, for I do not cause myself. If uncaused by another me, how could it be caused by you? If both of us cause pain, would not it be caused by we who have no part in it? Can anguish be uncaused? Suffering is nothing special. Even jugs and rolls of cloth do not come from themselves, others, both, or nothing. Change. If something has an essence, how can it ever change into anything else? A thing doesn't change into something else. Youth does not age. Age does not age. If something changed into something else, milk would be butter, or butter would not be milk. Were there a trace of something, there would be a trace of emptiness. Were there no trace of anything, there would be no trace of emptiness. Buddhists say emptiness is relinquishing opinions. Believers in emptiness are incurable. Section 7. 500 years after Shantideva, in the late spring of 1398, the great Tibetan Lama Tsongkhapa was meditating in a solitary mountain retreat south of Lhasa. One night, he dreamed that he was seated in Tushita, the pure land of the future Buddha Maitreya, in the presence of Nagarjuna and his followers. The 6th century Indian scholar Buddhapalita rose from the gathering, walked toward him, and placed a Sanskrit text on his head. When Tsongkhapa woke up, he turned to the passage he had been reading in Buddhapalita's commentary on Nagarjuna's verse. The verse read, "Were mind and matter me, I would come and go like them. If I were something else, they would say nothing about me." At that very moment, he experienced a sudden, non-conceptual understanding of emptiness. He described the experience as having turned his world upside down. His vision of emptiness was the exact opposite of what he had imagined until then. In a flood of inspiration, he composed a poetic eulogy to Gautama Buddha entitled In Praise of Contingency. Tibetan lamas like Tsongkhapa had identified the author of Verses from the Center with his later tantric namesake. They believed that Nagarjuna had still been alive in India shortly before Buddhism became established in Tibet in the 8th century. This meant Nagarjuna had a 600-year career, made possible by his elixir of immortality, which stretched from the composition of his verses, through the retrieval of the wisdom discourses to the writing of seminal tantric commentaries. Although Verses from the Center was one of the first texts translated into Tibetan, from the very beginning it was understood through the lens of the centrist philosophical tradition, as explained by later Indian scholars. 9 years after his experience of emptiness, Tsongkhapa entered another retreat to compose an extensive commentary on Verses from the Center. This learned and elegant study, however, closely follows Clear Words, an earlier verse-by-verse analysis of Nagarjuna's work. Tsongkhapa compares Verses from the Center to the body that serves as the foundation for all centrist treatises, and while he sometimes sheds fresh light on certain passages, he is always concerned with defending the orthodox philosophical interpretations of the text. Tsongkhapa and his followers sought to define emptiness by specifying exactly what is negated when something is said to be empty. Without such precision, they argued, you would risk using emptiness either to negate too much, which would lead to nihilism, or not enough, which would render it ineffective in removing the fixations that keep you trapped. For them, what is negated by emptiness is an instinctive sense of selves and things existing in their own right. From the point of view of common sense, an object like a vase appears to stand out on its own, seemingly independent of its causal conditions, its components, and the linguistic conventions humans use to identify it. Tsongkhapa insisted that emptiness was simply the absence of this sense of inherent existence. Emptiness wasn't a doorway to a mystical transcendent sphere. It merely removed the false appearance of inherent existence, thereby revealing a vision of the essential contingency of life. In order to transform this rational understanding into lived experience, Tsongkhapa and his followers used a precise meditative technology. Its purpose was to turn conceptual knowledge into a non-conceptual realization of emptiness. This rational and technical approach is epitomized by a work of Tsongkhapa's nephew, the first Dalai Lama, which systematically converts each of Nagarjuna's verses into a logical syllogism. By the time the fifth Dalai Lama became the supreme ruler of Tibet in 1642, Tsongkhapa's Gelug order had become the state religion, and this particular interpretation of centrism had become the state philosophy. About 150 years later, at the beginning of the 19th century, a counter-movement to this Gelug orthodoxy began to emerge in eastern Tibet. Traditions that had been forgotten or marginalized began to capture the attention of some of the most gifted lamas of the day. Among these was the practice of Dzogchen, or Great Completion, a contemplative discipline with parallels to Zen, whose origins went back to the very beginnings of Buddhism in Tibet. One of the most articulate proponents of Dzogchen at this time was the Gelug monk Shabkar Chokni Rangdrol, who embraced a broad, eclectic vision of Buddhism. In 1806, Shabkar retreated to an island in Lake Kokonor on the remote steppes between Tibet, Mongolia, and China to meditate and write. It was here that he composed his most famous work, The Flight of the Garuda, a cycle of songs on the practice of Dzogchen. Dzogchen, like Chan, insists that awakening is present here and now, at the very heart of ordinary experience, rather than as a distant future goal. The awakened mind of a Buddha is nothing other than the pristine awareness animating your own ordinary mind at every moment. To recognize this pristine awareness, it needs to be pointed out by a teacher. Shabkar captures this intimate oral process. He writes, "Now come up close and listen. When you look carefully, you do not find the merest speck of real mind you can put your finger on and say, 'This is it.' Not finding anything is an incredible find." He continues, "Friends, mind does not emerge from anything. It is primordially empty. There is nothing there to hold on to. It is not anywhere. It has no shape or color, and in the end, nowhere to go. There is no trace of its having been by. Its motions are empty motions, and that emptiness is obvious. Mind's nature is vivid as a flawless piece of crystal, intrinsically empty, naturally radiant, unimpededly responsive. Stripped bare of repetitive error, mind itself is surely and always Buddha." Such instructions undermine habitual perceptions by pointing out the essentially empty, radiant, and responsive nature of awareness. After being introduced to this vision that cuts free, you relax into an uncontrived, open spaciousness, which is neither a state of self-conscious meditation nor one of inattentive distraction. Having stripped awareness naked, insists Shabkar, then guard it vividly. This point alone is important. To protect this pristine awareness means recognizing and letting go of whatever impedes it. Ultimately, this includes spiritual and religious practices, as well as more mundane obstructions. As Shabkar says, when all I do is think about reality and let awareness undermine itself, I must stop. When I let go of fighting, loving, dealing, prostrating, circumambulating, sacred dance and gesture, I am alone and helpless. When I let go of mundane chatter, chants, and prayers, psychic energetic recitation, I am silent. When I let go of muddled mundane thought, faith, compassion, esoteric practices, I am thought-free, vivid. By systematically stripping away any behavior that inhibits the spontaneous play of pristine awareness, you uncover a freedom that is a dynamic response to each and every circumstance of life. To illustrate this sublime play of awareness, a Dzogchen master invites you to the solitude of a mountain peak where you can gaze into the vast expanse of a sky so limpid no trace of cloud or haze can be seen, where pure radiance alone shimmers. Then, as the first rays of the morning sun strike the peak, you ask the teacher to reveal the play of awareness. He signals you to still your mind and stare at him. Rattling his hand drum, he invokes the lamas of the lineage. When your attention is relaxed and free of thoughts, he utters a violent shout and asks, "What is the heart of the matter? What is it? What is it?" Chapter Connection. I the beholder, the one I behold, the beholding itself do not connect with one another. Just as I who desire, the one I desire, the desiring itself do not connect. We do not connect because we are not apart from one another. We would not be together if we were apart. I am other than you in relation to you. I could not be your other without you. Were I other than you, then even without you, I would be someone else. I cannot be your other without you. There is no otherness in either you or me. Without otherness, there is no me or you. I do not connect with me, nor do I connect with you. No connecting, no connections, no connectors. Chapter Essence. If my essence came from causes and conditions, it would have been constructed. Essences are neither contingent nor contrived. If I have no essence, how can you? What is other for me is for you your own. How can you not be yourself or someone else? Without something, there could be no nothing. Do not people say a thing becomes nothing when it changes into something else? You who behold somethings and nothings, yourselves and others, are blind to what the Buddha taught. Through understanding somethings and nothings, Gautama told Katyayana to relinquish being and nothingness. If I had an essence, I would never cease to be me. My nature could never be anything else. If I had no essence, whose nature would it be to be anything else? I am me, I will never not be, the longing for eternity. I used to be, I am not anymore, the cut of annihilation. The sage avoids being and nothingness. Life. Is life what drives me? Whether constant or fleeting, drives are not alive like life. How am I alive? When I cannot be found inside this mind or body, who is there to be alive? If I survived by clinging on to thoughts and feelings, how could I evolve? Without clinging or evolving, who can be alive? If I came and went, how could I be freed? If clinging binds, I who cling would be unbound like those who do not cling. How is it I am trapped? Neither bound nor unbound are free. Were the bound to be freed, freedom and bondage would be simultaneous. I am free, I cling no more, liberation is mine. The greatest clinging is to cling like this. What do you think of a freedom that never happens? What do you make of a life that won't go away? Section 8. Let's bring this discussion into a different context. In 1818 in London, 11 years after Shabkar wrote The Flight of the Garuda, the 22-year-old poet John Keats described Shakespeare as the least of an egoist that it was possible to be. He was nothing in himself, but he was all that others were, or that they could become. Later that year, in a letter to a friend, Keats expanded on this idea. He wrote, "As to the poetical character itself, It is not itself. It has no self. It is everything and nothing. It has no character. It enjoys light and shade. It lives in gusto, be it foul or fair, high or low, rich or poor, mean or elevated. It has as much delight in conceiving an iago as an Imogen. What shocks the virtuous philosopher delights the chameleon poet. To be empty of a fixed identity allows you to enter fully into the shifting, poignant, beautiful, and tragic contingencies of the world. It makes possible an acute awareness of life as a creative process, in which each person is inextricably involved. Yet, despite the subjective intensity of such a vision, when you turn your attention onto the subject itself, no isolated observer can be found. This ability to be empty of self yet filled with the world, which Keats said Shakespeare possessed so enormously, he described in another letter as negative capability. He defined it as when a man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact or reason. These words perfectly describe a Chan or Zen practice in which the meditator settles into a state of perplexity by focusing on a question like, "What is this?" This is not a spiritual riddle with an enigmatic solution. It's an articulation of the mystery of life itself. To penetrate this mystery, you must not foreclose it by substituting an answer, whether it's a metaphysical proposition or a religious belief. You have to learn to suspend the habit of reaching for a word or phrase to fill the emptiness opened by the question. The meditator seeks not a solution but a living, ongoing response, which is often expressed as spontaneous verse, song, or poetry. When you transpose it to a Buddhist context, negative capability perfectly captures the tension between the negative quality of emptiness and the positive capability of creative and empathetic responsiveness that it allows. Keats may have developed this idea from his contemporary, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, a poet whose intellectual brilliance, chaotic private life, and drug addiction made him the dark genius of the English Romantic movement. For Coleridge, the creative sensibility consisted in the suspension of the act of comparison, which permits a sort of negative belief. He illustrated this with the example of how a water boatman insect makes its way upstream by alternate pulses of active and passive motion, now resisting the current and now yielding to it in order to gain further strength and a momentary fulcrum for a further propulsion. This letting go, which is also an engagement, unwittingly suggests how one might tread the path that, in the Buddha's words, goes against the stream. Neither Keats nor Coleridge knew anything about Buddhism, let alone the notion of emptiness, because no information on the subject was available in Europe during their lifetimes. Coleridge was nonetheless struck by the first translations and studies of Indian texts that appeared in the late 18th century. In 1797, around the time he composed his opium-inspired fragment Kubla Khan, he wrote to a friend, "At other times I adopt the Brahmin creed. I should much wish, like the Indian Vishnu, to float about along an infinite ocean cradled in the flower of the lotus, and wake once in a million years for a few minutes, just to know I was going to sleep a million years more." As with Kubla Khan, this intoxicated reverie reveals how Coleridge looked to the distant and barely known Orient as a source of visions that evoked his sense of the sublime. The Romantic poets, however, sought their primary experience of the sublime in nature. Both Coleridge and Keats undertook long walking tours through inhospitable landscapes that gave them awestruck glimpses of the power and magnitude of the natural world. While in Germany in 1799, Coleridge described in his journal how he lay awake at night, listening to the thunders and howling of the breaking ice. This led him to reflect on how there are sounds more sublime than any sight can be, more absolutely suspending the power of comparison, and more utterly absorbing the mind's self-consciousness in its total attention to the object working on it. In contrast to the pleasure and delight induced by contemplating something beautiful, an experience of the sublime evokes exhilarated feelings of both terror and fascination. These opposing forces of fear and attraction cancel each other out, leaving you suspended in a poised rapture where the habitual, self-preoccupied chatter of the mind is stilled. You are left in silence, unable to find words to convey the awesome intensity of the moment. Conventional descriptions fail, for you are elevated to the peaks of human experience while simultaneously plumbing its depths. This pristine awareness may last only a few seconds, but it seems to linger in eternity. The origin of the Buddhist sublime lies not in the awesome power of the natural world, but in the tragic excess of human life. According to legend, the Buddha was raised as a prince within the confines of a palace. After persuading his father to let him see the world beyond the walls, he encountered a sick person, an old person, and a corpse. On each occasion, he was overwhelmed by what he saw. In glimpsing the inescapable destiny of all that is born, his narrow self-preoccupation was suspended, and he found himself exposed to what the Chinese would call the great matter of birth and death. This vision of existence was both profoundly disturbing and utterly irresistible for the young man. Although he returned to the palace, he felt, in the words of the poet Ashvaghosha, like a lion pierced deeply in the heart by a poisoned arrow. One night, he slipped away and disappeared into the forest to pursue the terrible questions he could no longer ignore. His quest culminated 6 years later in a profound awakening, which left him in a stunned silence. His awakening stemmed from the same inarticulate depth at which his questions were first asked. Awakening, like birth and death, is excessive. It exceeds the Buddha's ability to articulate it in words or images. Nagarjuna reflects on this. The Buddha despaired of teaching the Dharma, knowing it hard to intuit its depths. To distinguish between the ineffable depths of the Buddha's teaching and its formulation in words, Nagarjuna introduces the notion of two truths. He describes the wordless, silent depth as sublime truth, while recognizing that any expression of it can only ever be a partial truth. For Nagarjuna, this distinction is crucial. As he explains, without knowing how they differ, you cannot know the deep. Without relying on conventions, you cannot disclose the sublime. Without intuiting the sublime, you cannot experience freedom. Although the Buddha used terms like deathless, timeless, and unborn to suggest the sublime, such descriptions are unavoidably partial and inadequate. No matter how refined they may sound, they are simply metaphors drawn from our knowledge of death, time, and birth, juxtaposed with our notion of absence. Even the term emptiness is a metaphor, taken from our experience of things like empty bottles, empty rooms, and empty spaces. Nagarjuna is nonetheless aware that without resorting to language, the Buddha could not have communicated his discovery of freedom at all. While Nagarjuna is conscious of the inadequacy of any word in denoting the sublime, his own term of choice is emptiness. The use of such a bleak and uninviting word is perhaps a deliberate ploy to prevent the tendency to picture the sublime as anything. Although later Buddhist philosophers provided exact definitions of emptiness, Nagarjuna's own use of the term throughout his verses is imprecise. He prefers elusive imagery to rational precision, logical games to tightly argued syllogisms, and provocative suggestions to clear-cut instructions. As soon as it is suggested that the sublime cannot be adequately represented by words and images, the temptation arises to imagine it as something completely separate from the mundane unfolding of ordinary life. Nagarjuna emphatically resists this urge to reify emptiness, nirvana, or freedom into something transcendent or wholly other. He states, "Life is no different from nirvana, nirvana no different than life. Life's horizons are nirvanas, the two are exactly the same." The sublime may be beyond the grasp of concepts or language, but it is only ever encountered deep within the pulsing heart of what is happening here and now. Acts, Part 1. Buddha taught that acts are motives of the mind and words and gestures you are moved to express. Restraining yourself and loving others are seeds that bear fruit in this life and beyond. Part 2. If they lasted till they ripened, acts would be static. If acts stopped, how would they bear fruit? Seeds turn into plants that bear fruit. Motives turn into minds that bear fruit. Seeds are neither severed from nor forever fused with fruits of plants. Motives neither severed from nor forever fused with fruits of minds. No killing and no stealing, no abusing and no lying, no slandering, swearing, gossiping, no coveting, resenting, or fixating. These pristine acts are ways to practice that ripen as beauty and pleasure here and elsewhere. Part 3. Acts like contracts are as irrevocable as debts. their irrevocability ensures fruition. Only patient cultivation frees you from their grip. Insight by itself is insufficient. Were acts transcended by understanding, insight would destroy them. Irrevocability alone survives the vexed transition from one life to the next. Emptiness does not negate it. Life does not set it in stone. Part 4. My acts are irrevocable because they have no essence. If they had an essence, they would be permanent. No one could have performed them. I would fear the consequence of things I did not do. I would not lead a noble life. Descriptions would conflict with one another. I would be incapable of telling good and bad apart. Having already ripened, acts would ripen again. If acts are compulsive and compulsions unreal, how can acts be real? Acts and compulsions form me. What could empty acts and compulsions form? Blocked by confusion, consumers consume the fruits of acts, which neither they nor anyone else committed. Where are the doers of deeds absent among their conditions? Where are the fruits of doers and deeds that cannot be found? Where are the consumers of fruits that are not there? Imagine a magician who creates a creature who creates other creatures. Acts why perform are creatures who create others. Deeds, compulsions, bodies, doers, fruits are like invisible cities, mirages, dreams. Section 9. The story of how verses from the center found its way from India through China and Tibet to the West illustrates Nagarjuna's own understanding of the contingency of things. Without a series of verses composed nearly 2,000 years ago by an enigmatic Indian Buddhist author, the words you are hearing now would not exist. The seeds of Nagarjuna's verses have borne and continue to bear fruits. None of these fruits can be said to be identical to Nagarjuna's own words or intentions, nor can they be regarded as entirely different. A Nagarjunian account of the destiny of his work would recognize a continuity between the first tracing of Sanskrit letters onto a palm leaf in ancient India and a digitalized English version that can be downloaded from the internet. At the same time, it would note the contingent and unpredictable events that link the two together. The Sanskrit and English texts are neither identical nor different. The nature of their relationship cannot be pinned down by a simple either-or logic. Take the term zero. Until the 15th century, it was a Spanish word used to pronounce the Arabic cifr, which also gave us the English word cipher. When Arabic-speaking Muslims settled in Spain, they brought with them a system of arithmetic that included a symbol for zero. This would prove indispensable in constructing the mathematics now used in everything from quantum physics to computer programming. The Muslims had discovered the idea in India. The Arabic cipher was their pronunciation of the Sanskrit shunya, which, from the 9th century at least, had been used in India to represent the mathematical notion of zero. Shunya means empty, and it was the term Nagarjuna used as the key to understanding what the Buddha taught. Thus, shunya became shifr, and shifr became zero. We can hear the continuity and the discontinuity between them. Or consider the evolution of human beings. We have sufficiently complex brains, social organization, technology, and culture to question our own origins. We apparently come from the sea, from microscopic single-celled organisms. Over 4,000 million years, these evolved into more complex forms of aquatic life, which then emerged from the salty depths to become amphibians, reptiles, insects, birds, and finally mammals. One strand among the higher primates eventually evolved into us. Looking back, we can visualize this bewildering genealogy of life forms, all intimately connected to, contingent upon, and flowing into one another. Yet to make sense of it all, we need concepts and images of amphibians, reptiles, insects, birds, mammals, each with its own neatly drawn borders, separating it from the rest. Herein lies the dilemma Nagarjuna addresses in his verses. How can we make sense of life without literalizing the very concepts we need to make sense of it? For Nagarjuna, this is not just a semantic riddle. A sense of life as essentially composed of discrete bits and pieces seems to be embedded in the grammar of the languages we speak. It may lie even deeper as an instinctual survival mechanism, or as Nagarjuna would have believed, as an inborn, delusory tendency that binds us to a repetitive cycle of death and rebirth. To experience life, even for a moment, in a way that is no longer in thrall to such a mechanism would require a profound shift in perspective in the core of your being. Theories, beliefs, and doctrines can provide a conceptual framework for such a shift, but commitment, inquiry, focused awareness, and courage are needed to realize it. Nagarjuna's verses are an attempt to disentangle the knots of thought, language, and common sense that keep him and us trapped within a view of life that deep down we know does not make sense. At times it feels as though his struggle with words spins him round in circles, but he moves on, driven by his faith in the possibility of breaking free from the mesmerizing spell of fixations. Nagarjuna's understanding of contingency does not come from an analysis of history, etymology, or evolutionary biology. Living in a traditional society in ancient India, he studies what is close at hand, the plants that grow around him, the fires that flicker in the dark, as well as his own contemplative experience of walking, seeing, desiring, acting, suffering, and holding opinions. He questions what it means for these things to be connected, to have a past and a future, to be different or identical, to have a cause or a nature, to appear and disappear, to change. He asks what it means for a person to be a self and an other. Whatever insights he gains, he applies to his understanding of classical Buddhist ideas like emptiness, awakening, and nirvana, which in turn are themselves further analyzed and refined. Self. Were mind and matter me, I would come and go like them. If I were something else, they would say nothing about me. What is mine when there is no me? Were self-centeredness eased, I would not think of me and mine. There would be no one there to think them. What is inside is me, what is outside is mine. When these thoughts end, compulsion stops, repetition ceases, freedom dawns. Fixations spawn thoughts that provoke compulsive acts. Emptiness stops fixations. Buddhas speak of self and also teach no self, and also say there's nothing which is either self or not. When things dissolve, there's nothing left to say. The unborn and unceasing are already free. Buddha said, "It is real, and it is unreal, and it is both real and unreal, and it is neither one nor the other. It is all at ease, unfixatable by fixations, incommunicable, inconceivable, indivisible. You are not the same as or different from conditions on which you depend. You are neither severed from nor forever fused with them." This is the deathless teaching of Buddhas who care for the world. When Buddhas don't appear and their followers are gone, the wisdom of awakening bursts forth by itself. Time. If I had a past, what is now and yet to come would have already happened. Were there no now and future then, how could now and future ever have a past? Without a past, there is no now and future. What is now and still to come would never happen. Past, present, future are like bottom, middle, top, and 1, 2, 3. You can't grasp time, and times you can are never time itself. Why configure time you cannot grasp? If time depends on things, how could I ever have time apart from things? Without things, how can time persist? Section 10. Nagarjuna understands life as the sublime unfolding of a complex array of conditions, all of which emerge contingently. He writes, "Seeds turn into plants that bear fruit. Motives turn into minds that bear fruit. Seeds are neither severed from nor forever fused with fruits of plants. Motives are neither severed from nor forever fused with fruits of minds." Causes, whether they are seeds or motives, appear to be distinct from their effects. Not only can they be separated by long stretches of time, they seem to be different things. The acorn that gave birth to the oak is in no way comparable to the great tree that stands where the acorn was planted 200 years ago. But by paying attention to the sprouting of the acorn and its transformation into a full-grown tree, we realize there is no single point at which the acorn stopped and the oak tree began. Nagarjuna is suspicious of clear-cut things like seeds and plants, as well as language that talks of them as forever fused with or severed from each other. Mindful awareness of living processes explodes the myth of separate things and nothings to reveal a world that is irreducible to the conceptual and linguistic images we use to describe it. Seen in this light, each moment of experience emerges from and within a seamless continuum of conditions. This is not only true of seeds and plants, but of our awareness of them as well. As Nagarjuna says, just as a child is born from father and mother, so consciousness springs from eyes in colorful shapes. You might intuitively believe that consciousness, the most private and enduring feature of yourself, is more real than the passing phenomena it is aware of. Consciousness can feel like a solitary witness already there within you, just waiting for things to appear. For Nagarjuna, this is a convenient illusion. Consciousness is meaningless unless it is conscious of something. It is inseparable from the sense organs and objects that allow it to take place. It is as contingent and ephemeral as the flickering displays of colors and shapes it beholds. Such reflections lead Nagarjuna to the contingency of human suffering. No matter how real anxiety or depression feel when we are gripped by them, they too can be seen to emerge from a complex set of conditions. He writes, "Blocked by confusion, I forge a destiny through impulsive acts. Consciously, I enter situations where personality unfolds and world impacts on a sensitive soul." The confusion that blocks us is that instinctive denial of contingency, which simultaneously insists on the presence of a non-contingent self. This creates a sense of opposition to an unstable world outside that entices, frightens, or bores us. These responses in turn lead to obsessions with things we crave to have or to avoid. This craving crystallizes into clinging to sensual experiences, opinions, rules, and selves. Each step reinforces the pattern of self-obsessively trying to freeze and control reality. Clinging, says Nagarjuna, is to insist on being someone. To understand the contingency of your experience requires more than just being aware of the present moment as a consequence of past causes. Nagarjuna also speaks of the contingency of yourself and your attributes. Of the body, he says, "I have no body apart from parts which form it. I know no parts apart from a body." Just as we think of an oak tree as different from the acorn that caused it, we also think of the tree as different from the leaves, branches, and trunk that form it now. The body, too, seems to be one thing, while its limbs and torso are other things. Yet if we suspend this assumption and observe the body as it is experienced through the senses, such hard and fast distinctions dissolve. Just as there is no exact time when a fertilized ovum becomes an embryo, you can experience no exact point where the arm becomes the shoulder. We can glimpse the body as an interdependent whole, which is neither the same as nor different from the sum of its parts. To capture the complex and dynamic nature of cause and effect and part and whole contingency, Nagarjuna meditates on a fire. You can imagine him engaged in that timeless act of contemplating a glowing mass of burning fuel on which flames flicker and dance. For Nagarjuna, the fire is a metaphor for human experience. The mass of the fire represents the energetic combustion of mental and physical processes that generate the flickering dance of the self. Just as you can distinguish the fire from the flames, you can distinguish the body-mind from the self. But no clear-cut line can be drawn between them, nor can they be regarded as identical. He writes, "Were the fire its flames, act and actor would be one. Were flames something else, they could not have lit this fire." Nagarjuna questions what it means for flames to be dependent on the fire, and vice versa. Even the idea of contingency can suggest a relationship between separate things, one being depended on and the other doing the depending. He concludes, "Flames do not depend on fires, nor are they independent of them. Fires do not depend on flames, nor are they independent of them." Pushed to its limits, the language of contingency itself begins to break down. Nagarjuna's awareness of contingency also includes the role of language in constructing our sense of reality. He recognizes that experience is configured through concepts and words to make it intelligible. To cultivate awareness, you might be encouraged to live fully in the present moment, as though the present were somehow more real than the past and the future. But the idea of the present is unintelligible without a notion of past and future. In reality, there is no such thing as the present moment. However valuable it may be to try to remain totally in the here and now, you shouldn't mistake a strategy for reducing distraction with a metaphysical statement about the nature of time. As Nagarjuna says, past, present, future are like bottom, middle, top, and 1, 2, 3. Just as middle only makes sense in relation to what is above and below, so present only makes sense in relation to what is already gone and what is still to come. The dividing line between them only exists in thought and language. It cannot be found in the sensuous unfolding of life itself. As soon as you let go of fixed ideas of the past and future, the idea of the present evaporates as well. If life has no beginning and no end, no before and no after, asks Nagarjuna, how can it be centered in a present? Much of Verses from the Center consists of Nagarjuna's insistent probing inquiry into life and language. He subjects things and words to a relentless scrutiny, considering them from different angles, in different lights, constantly teasing out their contingency. Toward the end of the work, in the poem Awakening, he announces that contingency is emptiness. To recognize that things are contingent is the key to understanding what it means for them to be empty. A self, a plant, a body, or a time is empty because it is incapable of being neatly circumscribed as a thing cut off from other things. They are utterly contingent on the complex interplay of conditions, attributes, and language with which they are not identical and from which they are not different. To know emptiness is not to negate these things, but to be dumbfounded by the sheer fecundity of life. Chapter Disappearance. When you disappear, you do not appear or fail to appear. When you appear, you neither disappear nor fail to disappear. How can I disappear without appearing? Can I die and not be born? What disappears appears. Can I disappear and appear at once? Do I die the moment I am born? Can I appear and disappear at once? Am I born the moment I die? When everything changes, how can I appear and not disappear? Whether dead or alive, I am neither here nor gone. Without things, there would be no appearance or disappearance, without which there would be no things. Whether empty or not, things neither appear nor disappear. Appearance and disappearance are not the same or different. They fool you. Things are not born from things or nothing. Nothing is not born from nothing or things. If things are either eternal or ephemeral, to believe in them is either eternalism or nihilism. Isn't the appearance and disappearance of seeds and fruits the flow of life itself? Seeds would be annihilated. The disappeared cannot appear again. You would be erased in nirvana when the flow of life is stilled. If life stopped, how would it start again? If it never stopped, how would it start again? How can it flow without flowing before, flowing now, or flowing later? Chapter Buddha Nature. It's not physical, emotional, conceptual, impulsive, conscious, or anything else. It does not dwell in us, nor we in it. It does not own us. If it depended on us or on anything else, it would not be in itself. How could it be anything but itself? Could what is not itself be Buddha Nature? What is it apart from itself or something else? Is it independent of body, feeling, thought, impulse, or consciousness? It depends on them now and is set to continue. Can you say that Buddha nature is contingent when what is depended on and what depends are empty? Can you say that Buddha nature is empty when empty and not empty are mere ciphers? Fixed ideas of permanence and transience, finitude and infinity, have no place when all is well. Believers believe in Buddhas who vanish in nirvana. Don't imagine empty Buddhas vanishing or not. When transfixed on what's unwavering beyond fixation's range, you see no Buddha nature. Buddha nature is the nature of this world. Buddha nature has no nature, nor does this world. Section 11. In the homage that opens Verses from the Center, Nagarjuna praises Buddhas as those who teach contingency and ease fixations. The chapters that follow evoke an awareness of contingency not for the sake of establishing a philosophical position, but as a means of easing those fixations that lock you into a life of anguished alienation. In keeping with the Buddha's aim to show suffering and the ending of suffering, Verses from the Center is a therapeutic critique of the patterns of thought and behavior that provoke and sustain our existential unease. Fixation describes the common existential reaction to finding yourself in an unpredictable world. The only certainty in this world is that at some unspecified time, you will die. As a way of coping with the anxiety this awareness generates, human beings create a picture of life in which the self appears to be intrinsically separate from the multitude of other people and things that surround, attract, and threaten it. by assuming a safe distance between me and you, and between me and mine, you feel able to manage whatever situations you face. Whatever survival advantages this strategy may have conferred on our early ancestors, it makes us feel cut off from the web of physical and mental processes that sustain life. Depending on the metaphors of our culture, we might feel abandoned, cast out of the Garden of Eden, lonely, fragmented, alienated, or trapped in a beginningless cycle of rebirth where we expend a great deal of energy getting nowhere. This painful sense of separation is enabled by the capacity of our brains and language to construct complex representations of experience. Rather than inhabiting our immediate sensory environment, we participate in a plurality of worlds: historical, social, economic, religious, psychological, and so on, which extend not only into the past and future, but across geographic and cultural boundaries. Yet, instead of seeing the self as a convenient point of reference that allows coherence among these diverse worlds, our anxious craving for security literalizes it into a real, discrete thing. Fixations about self and things sustain the largely unconscious holding pattern in which we hover above the world of immediate experience. Although fixation seems to freeze the self into an undisturbed, isolated cell, the tightness of its grip spawns chaotic torrents of thoughts, images, and emotions. Like squeezing the trigger of a gun or pressing an alarm button, fixations like egoism, craving, conceit, and opinionatedness erupt as proliferating streams of longings and worries. Even when they are consciously restrained by a sense of personal and social morality, the insistence and allure of a recurrent fantasy is often enough to break whatever resolve you may have had. You find yourself thinking, saying, and doing things as much out of compulsion as choice. What may have begun as an uncharacteristically compulsive act can become an addictive form of behavior. The nearer you come to crossing the barrier between a fantasy of seduction and an act of seduction, the more difficult it becomes to resist. Yet the achingly desirable promise of a fantasy is rarely fulfilled in experience. Having achieved your objective, you are left feeling curiously hollow and disappointed. You may not have to wait long, though, before another sequence of images and thoughts begins to stir within this emptiness, luring you toward the next deed. While affirming the traditional emphasis on self-restraint and love as the basis for moral integrity, Nagarjuna recognizes that a genuine solution to the dilemma of fixation requires more than just adhering to ethical precepts. Although proliferating thoughts can be contained by moral commitment and even neutralized by meditative absorption, they are only resolved, according to Nagarjuna, by emptiness. Fixations spawn thoughts that provoke compulsive acts. Emptiness stops fixations. Although his verses explore and explode assumptions about the self, nowhere does Nagarjuna equate emptiness with the absence or negation of self. This is implicit in the opening verse of his inquiry into the self, the very verse that prompted Tsongkhapa's enlightenment. Were mind and matter me, I would come and go like them. If I were something else, they would say nothing about me. Rather than denying the self, Nagarjuna points to its essential ambiguity. He recognizes that for a notion of self to be intelligible, it must provide a sense of constancy amidst change. That is what a self is for. It is what it does. The experiences of your childhood belong to the person who remembers them many decades later. The passage of life would make no sense if it couldn't be referred to an unchanging point of reference called me. We know from photographs and science that nothing remains today of the toddler's body that clutched our favorite toy. And we know from experience that this is even more true of the tearful thoughts and emotions that erupted when the toy was lost. If you are what you grasp, says Nagarjuna, you would not be here. For what you grasp comes and goes, it cannot be you. How can the grasp be the grasper? Were you identical to the physical and mental traits you think of as yourself, you would be subject to the same changes as your aging body and fickle mind. But this is not the case. The body may grow wrinkled and fat, while the mind may be overwhelmed by panic attacks, but none of this alters your sense of being the person to whom these things happen. Nagarjuna is equally aware that the person cannot be understood as different from the body and mind. If you were something other than your body and mind, how would your physical or mental traits describe you? Anything that can be thought or said about you is always in relation to a feature of your body or mind. You look in a mirror and comment, "I'm putting on weight." A friend points out that you have a tendency to be late. You reflect on this and recognize that it describes your behavior. But if you were able to remove all your physical and mental characteristics, nothing of you would be left. There would no longer be a basis on which to construct even the most tenuous notion of self. Nagarjuna's verses illuminate this paradoxical nature of self. He says, "Seeing reveals a seer who is neither detached nor undetached from seeing. How could you see, and what would you see in the absence of a seer?" A self or a subject is an integral component of human experience. Whether you assume the self is reducible to some element of experience, insist that it is a disconnected witness, or deny that it exists at all, in each case you fall prey to the allure of fixation. While these stances might seem to make sense, they place you in a position that is both logically and existentially untenable. For Nagarjuna, the Buddha did not preach a doctrine of no self. What characterizes an awakened perspective is the awareness that any dogmatic position is incompatible with freedom. Nagarjuna remarks, "Buddhas speak of self and also teach no self and also say there's nothing which is either self or not." Rather than seeing concepts like self and no self as the basis of a doctrinal position to be upheld or refuted, Nagarjuna treats them as terms within a strategic discourse of freedom, used therapeutically to address specific situations. Throughout the text, he recognizes that the same is true of any pair of polarized terms: same and different, real and unreal, empty and not empty, eternal and ephemeral. To say that emptiness stops fixations does not mean that understanding something called emptiness will suddenly halt something else called fixations. The terms emptiness and fixation suggest strategies for living, not discrete states of mind. As strategies, they encompass the complex ways we view the world, the values we uphold, the work we do, and the social structures we hope to develop. The crucial difference is that strategies of fixation give rise to anguish, while strategies of emptiness do not. Verses from the center can be understood as Nagarjuna's attempt to illustrate the strategy of emptiness in different contexts. At the heart of his approach is the recurrent theme of not losing a centered perspective by succumbing to fixated opinions of yourself as either identical or different, eternal or ephemeral, something or nothing. As he says, "You are not the same as or different from conditions on which you depend. You are neither severed from nor forever fused with them." This is the deathless teaching of Buddhas who care for the world. To have become a person means to have emerged contingently from a matrix of genetic, psychological, social, and cultural conditions. You are neither reducible to these conditions, nor are you separate from them. While a person is more than a DNA code, a psychological profile, and a social background, they cannot be understood apart from these factors. You are unique not because you possess some essential quality that differs from everyone else's, but because you have emerged from a unique and unrepeatable set of conditions. This deathless teaching is traditionally described as one that avoids the extreme positions of eternalism and nihilism. Nagarjuna describes these positions as fixed opinions about oneself. "I am me, I will never not be." That is the longing for eternity. "I used to be, I am not anymore." That is the cut of annihilation. As a solution, he points to a middle way in which the sage avoids being and nothingness. Emptiness does not mean abandoning the dualities of thought and language, but learning to live with them more lightly. Nagarjuna juggles with the ambiguous and inadequate words he cannot help but use. In one passage, he will take it for granted that everything is impermanent. Then in another, he will say that this is a nihilistic view. One moment he will deny that he has an essential nature, only to wonder in the next moment how he could not have one. He asks, "If I had an essence, I would never cease to be me. My nature could never be anything else. If I had no essence, whose nature would it be to be anything else?" Nagarjuna compares experience to a dream, a stage illusion, a mirage. Such things appear to be real, but on closer inspection, they turn out to be less real than supposed. Fixations do not manufacture a false reality. They exaggerate what is merely contingent. They imbue the self and things with a tightness, solidity, and opacity. Instead of experiencing the world as an uncertain play of conditions, we prefer the safety of one that appears clear-cut, predictable, and manageable. The price we pay for this preference is that life is rendered dull and repetitive. To relieve the tedium, we find ourselves driven to ever more intense moments of experience: food, shopping, drugs, sex, vacations, movies, religion. For Nagarjuna, the problem lies not in the way the world is, but in the way we have construed it. Loosening this excessive grip on yourself and things does not lead to chaos, but to a centered and attentive repose. While seeming to offer security, fixations actually generate instability and turmoil. An insistence that the self and things are unconnected leads to dissonance and conflict with a world that is deeply interconnected. Since the origins of suffering lie in such misperceptions, the strategy of emptiness involves learning to see in a way that leads to ease and well-being. Nagarjuna's aim is to change the way you see in order to transform the quality of your life. As he says, in seeing things to be or not to be, fools fail to see a world at ease. In a passage in the poem Self, Nagarjuna offers a glimpse of the sublime depth that is disclosed when the constricting hold of fixations is eased. It is all at ease, unfixatable by fixations, incommunicable, inconceivable, indivisible. Not only is the subjective experience one of ease, but ease is revealed as a feature of the sublime itself. Fixations not only generate conflict and anguish, they also obscure a natural world that endlessly unfolds and vanishes, untroubled by the desires and fears of humankind. Although we may take our fixations with utmost seriousness, the things we are fixated on are utterly unaffected by them. Life can never be tied down. While we generate volumes of theories and descriptions of reality, none can capture the mystery of its happening at all. And no matter how minutely we dissect and categorize experience, the lines we draw leave no trace on the seamless web of life itself. Nagarjuna's vision is one of uncompromising immanence. What keeps you locked in repetitive cycles of anguish has nothing to do with being cut off from a transcendent God or absolute. The classical Buddhist notions of Buddha nature and nirvana are treated as metaphors for a freedom that occurs in this very world of sense and reason. Nagarjuna says, when transfixed on what's unwavering beyond fixation's range, you see no Buddha nature. Buddha nature is the nature of this world. Buddha nature has no nature, nor does this world. To elevate anything, however noble, to the status of a transcendent reality beyond this world is fixation's final and perhaps most seductive strategy of all. Fixations are deeply embedded traits of human behavior. They do not magically evaporate the moment you experience the world as unfixatable. However liberating such insight may be, it is not enough to free you from the habit of fixation. Once the intensity of the unfixated moment fades, fixations reassert themselves. Even the experience of freedom itself is not immune. As Nagarjuna is aware, I am free, I cling no more, liberation is mine. The greatest clinging is to cling like this. A glimpse of freedom does not in itself free you from the craving to be someone special and apart. To be free from such longing requires the patient, ongoing cultivation of an intelligence that is acutely alert to the danger of self-deception. The aim of this process is to go beyond the very need to stand out. As Nagarjuna says, clinging is to insist on being someone, not to cling is to be free to be no one. Chapter Awakening. The Dharma taught by Buddhas hinges on two truths: partial truths of the world and truths which are sublime. Without knowing how they differ, you cannot know the deep. Without relying on conventions, you cannot disclose the sublime. Without intuiting the sublime, you cannot experience freedom. Misperceiving emptiness injures the unintelligent like mishandling a snake or miscasting a spell. The Buddha despaired of teaching the Dharma, knowing it hard to intuit its depths. Your muddled conclusions do not affect emptiness. Your denial of emptiness does not affect me. When emptiness is possible, everything is possible. Were emptiness impossible, nothing would be possible. In projecting your faults onto me, you forget the horse you are riding. To see things existing by nature is to see them without causes or conditions, thus subverting causality, agents, tools, and acts, starting, stopping, and ripening. Contingency is emptiness, which contingently configured is the middle way. Everything is contingent. Everything is empty. Were everything not empty, there would be no rising and passing. Ennobling truths would not exist. Without contingency, how could I suffer pain? This shifting anguish has no nature of its own. If it did, how could it have a cause? Deny emptiness, and you deny the origins of suffering. If anguish existed by nature, how would it ever cease? Absolute misery could never stop. How could you cultivate a path that exists by nature? How could it lead to the end of pain? A path on which you tread can have no essence of its own. If confusion existed by nature, I would always be confused. How could I know anything? Letting go and realizing cultivation and fruition could never happen. Who can attain absolute goals that by nature are unattainable? Since no one could reach them, there would be no community, with no truths, no dharma either. With no community or dharma, how could I awaken? I would not depend on awakening, nor awakening on me. A naturally unawakened person would never awaken no matter how hard he practiced for its sake. He would never do good or evil. An unempty person would do nothing. He'd experience fruits of good and evil without having done good or evil deeds. How can fruits of good and evil not be empty if they are experienced? To subvert emptiness and contingency is to subvert conventions of the world. It engenders passivity, acts without an author, authors who do not act. Beings would not be born or die, they would be frozen in time, alien to variety. If things were unempty, you could attain nothing. Anguish would never end. You would never let go of compulsive acts. To see contingency is to see anguish, its origins, cessation, and the path. Chapter Nirvana. Were everything not empty, nothing would happen. Nirvana would be a letting go and stopping of what? Nothing let go of, nothing attained, nothing annihilated, nothing eternal, unceasing, and unborn. That is Nirvana. If it were something, Nirvana would be contingent and would wither and die like all other things. Can Nirvana be nothing? Not to be something does not mean to be nothing. Were Nirvana nothing, it would be contingent like all other nothings. Things are created and contingent. Nirvana is neither. The letting go of what rises and passes is neither something nor nothing. Were Nirvana both something and nothing, things and nothings would be free, or Nirvana would be as contingent as they. Darkness and light cannot be one. Can I experience Nirvana as neither something nor nothing? This would be possible only if something or nothing were. After the Buddha died, he was not seen as existing or not. Even when he lived, he was not seen as such. Life is no different from Nirvana. Nirvana no different than life. Life's horizons are Nirvanas. The two are exactly the same. Visions of the beyond, of eternity, annihilation, depend on how you see Nirvana, the past and the future. What finitude in empty things? What infinity? What this? What else? What stays? What changes? The dissolving of objects and easing of fixations is peace. The Buddha never taught anyone anything. Section 12. Each chapter of Nagarjuna's verses from the center is an audacious excursion into the sublime landscape of contingency, following the track of emptiness. Nagarjuna invites you to accompany him along the twists and turns of the pathways he has created. Just as a path is nothing but a space cleared of obstacles to allow freedom of movement across a terrain, so emptiness is nothing but a space cleared of the fixations that prevent freedom of movement through the dilemmas and ambiguities of life. To follow the track of emptiness is to discern the living contours of contingency as they unfold from moment to moment. The trick is to stumble across one of these pathways in the first place. No matter how much you have thought about emptiness, the living experience of it may have passed you by. Somehow, a step has to be made across the gap that separates reason from experience, the head from the heart, metaphysics from poetry. The relentless drive of Nagarjuna's inquiry encourages you to take that step, either by shocking you out of habitual complacency or by slowly wearing down your resistance to his vision. Nagarjuna opens his verses with a reflection on the experience of walking. You can imagine him mindfully raising, moving, and placing one foot in front of the other as he proceeds slowly along a path. His meditation leads him into an ever-deepening perplexity about this simple act. He asks, walking does not start in steps taken or to come or in the act itself. Where does it begin? Before I raise a foot, is there motion, a step taken or to come, whence walking could begin? As he contemplates what moves, he realizes that his identity at that moment as a walker is dependent on the movement of his feet. The common-sense assumption that he is one thing and his moving feet are another is exploded, disclosing an emptiness in which the sheer contingency of his experience is revealed. He concludes, "These moving feet reveal a walker but did not start him on his way. There was no walker prior to departure. Who was going where?" Nagarjuna's meditations on the emptiness of common experiences like walking serve as the foundation for his exploration of specific themes of the Buddhist path, such as acts and their effects, Buddha-nature, the ennobling truths, awakening, and nirvana. For Nagarjuna, these ideas are only intelligible through an insight into contingency. Yet contingency as an abstract principle does not interest him. It is only significant when it is revealed as a felt, concrete experience. He says, "Without contingency, how could I suffer pain? This shifting anguish has no nature of its own. If it did, how could it have a cause? Deny emptiness, and you deny the origins of suffering." Such existential insight into contingency is the same as understanding the four ennobling truths, which Buddhist tradition regards as the components of awakening. To see contingency, says Nagarjuna, is to see anguish and its origins, cessation, and the path. Insight into contingency and emptiness does not add anything to your store of knowledge. Instead, it reveals an unsuspected dimension of depth that has the capacity to transform your life. For Nagarjuna, emptiness, contingency, sublime truth, Buddha nature, freedom, and nirvana all denote different facets of this dimension of depth. Access to this depth is triggered by an urgent existential process of inquiry that takes place here and now. Rather than a remote transcendent state, nirvana is a liberating relationship to all things. For Nagarjuna, it is simply the letting go of what rises and passes, and as such, is neither something nor nothing. It suggests a freedom that cannot be pinned down in either time or space, prompting him to ask, what do you think of a freedom that never happens? What do you make of a life that won't go away? The intelligence that animates verses from the center is one that generates and sustains freedom and ease. This experience does not, however, leave you suspended in a vacuum of moral indifference. Tsongkhapa, the Tibetan Lama we met earlier, quotes a discourse of the Buddha which says, "Whatever depends on conditions is said to be empty. Those who know emptiness are conscientious." This does not mean that emptiness miraculously grants you knowledge of what is right or wrong. Rather, the freedom of emptiness makes you aware of a freedom of choice, because in emptiness you are free, even if only for a moment, from the promptings of the fixations that provoke compulsive acts. As the fixated grip of self-centeredness is eased, an empathetic awareness of the suffering of others emerges. The silence of emptiness allows you to hear more clearly the cries of the world. Nagarjuna argues that only in a contingent and empty world are good and evil possible. In the frozen world configured by fixations, good or evil deeds would be unable to change anything. Fixations tend to leave you morally numb and indifferent. To gain your ethical bearings in the dynamic world we actually live in, it is necessary to ease the fixations that keep you locked in this moral apathy. As a foundation for such an ethics of depth, Nagarjuna recognizes the need to cultivate self-restraint and love, and to abide by accepted moral codes as a framework for making decisions. While Nagarjuna accepts the Buddha's authority on the principles of ethical behavior, he offers his own ideas as to how actions lead to effects in a contingent and uncertain world. Once an act is committed, he argues, it assumes a creative life of its own. Imagine a magician, he suggests, who creates a creature who creates other creatures. Acts I perform are creatures who create others. Once the fateful decision has been made, the words have left your lips, or the body's deed is done, the act is released into the flow of life. Its effects will, to some degree, reconfigure both yourself and the world in which you will encounter the next moral dilemma. The acts you commit now thus form the conditions under which your future choices will have to be made. Although an act is germinated in the privacy of your thoughts, as soon as it enters the public domain, it cannot be retracted or recalled. Nagarjuna declares that acts like contracts are as irrevocable as debts. Their irrevocability ensures fruition. The consequences of what we do now will outlive us. The irrevocability of our actions implies that we are responsible not only for our own conduct in this life, but for the impact of our actions after our death. The intuitions of the sublime that shimmer through these verses evoke a reality that far outstrips our capacity to represent it adequately in words or concepts. Yet this reality is not, for Nagarjuna, mere chaos. It unfolds in a bewildering variety of organisms that evolve according to natural laws. For human beings, it manifests as experiences of pleasure and pain for which we are obliged to assume moral responsibility. For in the very moment we think, speak, or act, we are creating the conditions that will unfold as our personal and collective futures. Chapter Contingency. Blocked by confusion, I forge a destiny through impulsive acts. Consciously, I enter situations where personality unfolds and world impacts on a sensitive soul. Personality creates consciousness, just as attention, the eye, and a colorful shape trigger vision. Impact is the meeting of consciousness, senses, and world. It leads to experience I crave to have and avoid. Craving makes me cling at senses, opinions, rules, and selves. Clinging is to insist on being someone. Not to cling is to be free, to be no one. To be someone is to be a conscious, impulsive, thinking, feeling body which is born, ages, dies, suffers torment, grief, pain, depression, and anxiety. Anguish emerges when someone is born. Impulsive acts are the root of life. Fools are impulsive. The wise see things as they are. When confusion stops through insight, impulsive acts cease. Stop this and that will not happen. Anguish will end. Chapter Opinion. I was here before. No, you weren't. This will last forever. These are horizons of the past. I will survive. No, you won't. This will end. These are horizons of the future. What happened in the past is not happening anymore. If you think what happened then became you now, what you grasp would be something else. What are you but what you grasp? If you are what you grasp, you would not be here. For what you grasp comes and goes. It cannot be you. How can the grasp be the grasper? You're not different from what happened then. If you were, you would not need a past. You could survive without having to die. The past would be severed, revocable. Others would experience your acts. Without a past, you would be either manufactured or uncaused. I was here before. No, you weren't. I was and I wasn't. You neither were nor weren't. I will survive. No, you won't. All opinions are absurd. If the gods were us, we would be eternal, for the gods are unborn in eternity. Were we other than them, we would be ephemeral. Were we different, we would never connect. If I were half a god and half a man, I would be eternal and ephemeral. What can be ephemeral without eternity? If this ends, what world would follow? If this never ends, what world would follow? Like the flame of a lamp, the flow of matter and mind neither ends nor never ends. This would end if mind and matter failed to flow from the dying of their past. It would never end if mind and matter failed to flow from a past that never died. If half this ended and half did not, I would both end and never end, leaving half the grasper dead and half undead, half the grasp destroyed, half undestroyed. Everything is empty in whom, about what, do opinions erupt? For Gautama, in whose embrace Dharma was shown and opinions vanished. Thank you for listening to this audio adaptation of Stephen Batchelor's Verses from the Center, a Buddhist Vision of the Sublime. I hope this journey through Nagarjuna's profound and challenging vision has been insightful. This audiobook is based on the original work, and if you found value in it, please consider supporting my efforts to create more audiobooks like this one by trying a free Audible trial for 30 days. You'll find a link in the description. Your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you again.